Penelope, darling, you're going to marry Harrison Blackwood in 3 weeks. The sentence left Vivian Sterling Hayes' mouth as casually as someone announcing the dinner menu, but it had the effect of a nuclear bomb on her 24-year-old daughter's life. Penelope nearly choked on her breakfast, her green eyes widening so dramatically they seemed about to pop out of their sockets. "I'm going to what?" The scream echoed through the sumptuous dining room of the Sterling Hayes mansion, making the crystal chandelier chimes tinkle slightly. Vivian sighed dramatically, adjusting her platinum chignon with a ballerina's precision. "Don't scream, Penelope. A lady never screams. And yes, you heard correctly. The marriage has already been arranged. The ceremony will be at the Whitmore Country Club." "Mother!" Penelope jumped from her chair as if she'd been electrocuted, knocking over her porcelain cup in the process. "You can't just arrange my marriage. We're not in medieval times." "Oh, my dear naive daughter." Vivian laughed with that crystalline laugh that always foretold bad news. "When you have $15 million in debt, any era will do. And Mr. Blackwood was very generous in his proposal." Penelope felt her blood freeze in her veins. "Debts? What debts? Dad didn't say anything about—" "Your father," Vivian interrupted with a disdainful wave of her gloved hand, "has the same business acumen as a hamster has for airplane piloting. Sterling Enterprises is bankrupt, darling, completely. We've lost everything." Penelope's world crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. She gripped the chair back to keep from collapsing along with it. But our money? Grandma's inheritance? The investments?" "Evaporated like cheap champagne," Vivian sighed, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Your father invested in a pyramid scheme disguised as a golden opportunity. We were swindled, darling. We're officially poor." Penelope laughed. It was a hysterical, desperate laugh, the kind that emerges when reality becomes so absurd that surrendering to insanity is all that's left. "And the solution is to sell me to the first millionaire who shows up? Like I'm cattle?" "Harrison Blackwood isn't just any millionaire," Vivian retorted, rising and walking to the window with her heels making a dramatic staccato on the marble. "He's the richest man in Boston. Some people call him cruel, others ruthless, but I prefer to think of him as determined." "Cruel?" Penelope's voice went up an octave. "And you want me to marry someone cruel?" "Oh, please," Vivian waved her hand as if shooing away an annoying fly. "Powerful men are always misunderstood. Besides, he's ridiculously handsome. I've seen photos." "Mother!" "And young, only 32, a very respectable difference." Penelope began pacing the room like a caged animal, her red hair swinging wildly. "I can't believe we're having this conversation." "I can't believe you arranged my marriage without even asking me." "Darling." Vivian turned with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you think we had a choice? Mr. Blackwood will pay off all our debts, save your father's companies, and even give us a generous monthly allowance. In return, he gets a young, beautiful wife from a good family. It's a perfect deal." "For everyone except me," Penelope screamed, feeling tears of rage burning her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. You always wanted a fairy tale wedding. Now you'll have one." "I wanted to marry for love." Vivian laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. "Love, Penelope? Your grandmother married for love and ended up raising chickens on a farm in the countryside. Your great-grandmother married for love and died poor at 50. Love, my dear, is a luxury our family can no longer afford." Penelope stopped pacing and stared at her mother with an intensity that would have melted steel. "What if I refuse? Then your father will go to prison for tax fraud. We'll lose this house by the end of the month, and you can work as a waitress to pay your student loans for the next 20 years. Vivian examined a painting on the wall with feigned interest. "But of course the choice is yours." The silence that followed was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Penelope felt as if she were being strangled by an invisible hand. Her entire life, carefully built on privileges and dreams, had crumbled in less than 15 minutes. "When," she whispered hoarsely, When am I going to meet him? Vivian's smile was triumphant. Tonight, dinner at the Ritz-Carlton, 8 o'clock. He insisted on meeting you before the wedding. How gentlemanly. Tonight, Penelope screamed again. Wear your navy blue dress. The Valentino. It makes a wonderful first impression. Penelope felt nausea rising in her throat. I can't do this, Mother. I can't marry a stranger. Of course you can. We Sterling women are made of stronger fiber. Vivian approached and touched her daughter's face with a gentleness that contrasted with her previous coldness. He might even fall in love with you, darling. You're beautiful, intelligent, and charming. What man wouldn't fall in love? What if I don't fall in love with him? Then you'll learn to live with it, as we all learned. Later, when Penelope finally managed to be alone in her room, she threw herself on the bed and screamed into her pillow until she was hoarse. Then she looked at herself in the mirror and tried to imagine what life would be like, married to a cruel, unknown man. Harrison Blackwood, she murmured to her reflection. I hope you're prepared. Because if you think you're getting a submissive and obedient wife, you are very, very wrong. She didn't know yet that in just a few hours, she would throw champagne in the face of the man who would become the love of her life. But fate, as always, has a peculiar sense of humor. And sometimes, the most disastrous beginnings lead to the most perfect endings. At exactly 7:45 p.m., Penelope Sterling Hayes stood in front of the Ritz-Carlton's golden revolving doors, looking like a vision in midnight blue Valentino and feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. Her hands trembled as she clutched her pearl-beaded purse so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Remember, darling, Vivian whispered beside her, checking her lipstick one final time in a compact mirror. Smile, be charming, and for heaven's sake, don't mention politics, religion, or your unfortunate tendency to rescue stray animals. I don't have an unfortunate tendency. You brought home 17 cats last year, Penelope. They needed homes. Just try to be agreeable, Vivian sighed, snapping her compact shut with military precision. Your entire future depends on this dinner. Penelope wanted to point out that her future had been decided without her consent. But before she could open her mouth, a doorman in pristine white gloves swept the door open with a flourish that belonged in a Broadway musical. The Ritz-Carlton's lobby was a symphony of cream marble, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered, rather than shouted, wealth. Penelope's heels clicked against the floor like a countdown timer as they approached the maître d', a silver-haired gentleman who looked like he could solve international crises with nothing but a raised eyebrow. The Sterling Hayes party? His accent was so crisp it could cut glass. Yes, Vivian replied, her social mask sliding seamlessly into place. We're meeting Mr. Blackwood. The maître d's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, fear, or perhaps a mixture of both. Of course. Right this way, ladies. They were led through the restaurant's main dining room, past tables filled with Boston's elite, their conversations creating a sophisticated hum that reminded Penelope of expensive bees in a very exclusive hive. She caught glimpses of familiar faces. The mayor's wife, that senator who was always on television, a tech mogul whose company made headlines weekly. But then, they reached a private alcove, and Penelope's breath caught in her throat. Harrison Blackwood was nothing like she'd expected. She'd imagined someone old, perhaps with graying hair and calculating eyes, maybe overweight from too many business lunches, or severe-looking with pinched features and a permanent scowl. Instead, Harrison Blackwood looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine's Most Eligible Bachelor issue. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd just run his fingers through it, and shoulders that strained against his perfectly tailored navy suit. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and when he looked up from his phone, Penelope felt something electric shoot down her spine. He was absolutely, devastatingly gorgeous, which somehow made everything worse. Mrs. Sterling Hayes, he said, standing with fluid grace and extending his hand. His voice was deep, cultured, with just a hint of roughness that suggested he hadn't always lived in boardrooms and country clubs. "A pleasure, Mr. Blackwood," Vivian practically purred, shaking his hand. "May I present my daughter, Penelope?" Harrison turned those storm-gray eyes on Penelope, and she felt like a butterfly pinned to a collection board. He extended his hand, and she had no choice but to take it. His handshake was firm, warm, and lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "Miss Sterling Hayes," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like something intimate. "You're even more beautiful than your photographs." Penelope's brain short-circuited. He'd seen photographs? How many photographs? Who had taken photographs? But before she could voice any of these questions, Vivienne was air-kissing Harrison's cheek and making excuses about another commitment that Penelope knew for certain didn't exist. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," Vivienne said with a smile that belonged in a shark documentary. "Penelope, darling, I'll have the driver pick you up at 10. And just like that, she was gone, leaving Penelope alone with the man she was supposed to marry in 3 weeks. "Shall we sit?" Harrison asked, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned gallantry that would have been charming if the entire situation weren't completely insane. Penelope sat because her knees had suddenly become unreliable. Harrison settled across from her, and she noticed he moved with the controlled grace of a predator. Everything about him screamed power, from his expensive watch to the way the waitstaff hovered at a respectful distance, waiting for the slightest signal. "You look terrified," he observed, his tone surprisingly gentle. "Wouldn't you be?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Harrison's mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "Actually, I'm curious about something. Your mother assured me you were enthusiastic about this arrangement." Penelope stared at him. "Enthusiastic? I found out about this marriage 12 hours ago." Something shifted in Harrison's expression. The business mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that looked almost like surprise. "I see. And how do you feel about marrying a complete stranger?" The question was delivered so matter-of-factly that Penelope felt anger bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. How did she feel? She felt like screaming. She felt like running. She felt like her entire life had been stolen and auctioned off to the highest bidder. "Honestly," she said, leaning forward slightly, "I think this whole thing is archaic, ridiculous, and completely insane. I think arranged marriages went out of style with horse-drawn carriages and corsets. And I think any man who would buy a wife like she's a piece of property is probably compensating for some serious inadequacies." The silence that followed was so complete that Penelope could hear her own heartbeat. Harrison stared at her, his storm-gray eyes unreadable, and she realized she might have just destroyed her family's only chance at financial salvation. Then he laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle or a condescending snort. It was a real laugh, deep and genuine, and completely unexpected. Several other diners turned to look, probably wondering what could possibly amuse the notoriously serious Harrison Blackwood. "Well," he said, still smiling, "that's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months." Penelope blinked, completely thrown off balance. "You're not angry?" "Should I be? You're absolutely right. This whole situation is insane." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. "Tell me, Miss Sterling Hayes, what would you do if you had a choice in the matter?" The question caught her off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean, if your family's financial situation weren't a factor, what would you want your life to look like?" For a moment, Penelope forgot where she was. She forgot about the arranged marriage and the debt and the impossible situation. She thought about her dreams, the ones she'd packed away when reality came crashing down that morning. "I'd want to finish my master's degree in art history," she said softly. "I'd want to travel, see the museums in Florence and Paris and Vienna, maybe work for a gallery someday, or curate exhibitions. I'd want to fall in love with someone who makes me laugh. Someone who sees the world the way I do. Harrison nodded slowly. And instead, you're here, about to marry Boston's most eligible monster. Are you? She asked before she could stop herself. A monster, I mean. Their eyes met across the table, and Penelope felt that electric sensation again. What do you think? What do you think? Harrison's question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Penelope found herself studying his face as if it held the secrets of the universe. Those storm-gray eyes gave nothing away, but there was something in the slight tilt of his head, the way his fingers drummed silently against the white tablecloth, that suggested he genuinely cared about her answer. I think, she said slowly, choosing her words like a diplomat navigating a minefield, that reputation and reality are often two very different things. Diplomatically said. He leaned forward slightly. But you didn't answer my question. Before Penelope could respond, a waiter appeared at their table as if summoned by some invisible signal. He was young, nervous, and clearly intimidated by Harrison's presence. Good evening, Mr. Blackwood, the waiter stammered, nearly dropping his notepad. Can I start you with some wine, perhaps the 1996 Dom Perignon? That sounds perfect, Harrison said, without taking his eyes off Penelope. And we'll need a few more minutes with the menu. As the waiter scurried away, Penelope couldn't help but notice how everyone in the restaurant seemed to orbit around Harrison like planets around the sun, always aware of his presence, always ready to cater to his slightest whim. Does that happen everywhere you go? She asked. What? People acting like you're some kind of royalty. Harrison's mouth quirked upward. Money has that effect on people. They either worship you or fear you. Sometimes both. Which do you prefer? Neither, actually. But fear is more reliable than worship. He paused as the waiter returned with the champagne, going through the elaborate ritual of cork removal and tasting with practiced efficiency. Fear keeps people honest about their intentions. Penelope watched as the golden liquid was poured into crystal flutes, the bubbles catching the candlelight like tiny captured stars. When the waiter finally retreated, Harrison raised his glass. To honest intentions, he said. Penelope picked up her flute but didn't raise it. What are your intentions, Mr. Blackwood? Harrison, he corrected. And my intentions are exactly what your mother outlined. Marriage, financial security for your family, and a suitable wife for business and social functions. The clinical way he said it made something cold settle in Penelope's stomach. How romantic. Romance wasn't part of the arrangement. No, I suppose it wasn't. She stared at the champagne bubbles rising endlessly to the surface. Tell me something, Harrison. In this business transaction masquerading as a marriage, what exactly do I get besides the privilege of being your trophy wife? Harrison set down his untouched champagne and studied her with those unreadable eyes. What would you like? My freedom, she said immediately. That's the one thing I can't give you. Then we have a problem. What happened next would later become the stuff of Boston society legend, retold at dinner parties and charity galas for years to come. Penelope Sterling Hayes, in a moment of pure rebellious instinct, picked up her champagne flute and, with the precision of someone who'd been raised on proper etiquette but had finally reached her breaking point, threw the entire contents directly into Harrison Blackwood's face. The Dom Perignon hit him square in the forehead, cascading down his aristocratic features like a very expensive waterfall. Golden droplets clung to his dark eyelashes and dripped from his perfectly sculpted jaw onto his undoubtedly custom-made shirt. The restaurant went dead silent. Penelope sat frozen, her empty champagne flute still raised in the air, watching in horror as reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had just assaulted Boston's most powerful man with champagne that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Harrison didn't move. He sat perfectly still, champagne dripping from his chin, his expression completely unreadable. Around them, other diners stared with the fascination of people witnessing a spectacular car crash. Oh my God, Penelope whispered, finally lowering the flute. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I just... Don't apologize. His voice was quiet, calm, and somehow more terrifying than if he'd started shouting. A waiter appeared with a towel, his face pale with panic, but Harrison waved him away without looking. His eyes never left Penelope's face as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pristine white handkerchief. Don't apologize, he repeated, slowly wiping champagne from his face with methodical precision. That was the most genuine reaction anyone's had to me in years. Penelope stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. You're not angry? Oh, I'm furious, Harrison said mildly, continuing to clean champagne from his collar. But not for the reason you think. What do you mean? He finished with the handkerchief and looked at her directly. I'm furious that someone as spirited as you is being forced into this situation. I'm furious that your family's desperation puts you in a position where you feel trapped. And I'm furious that I'm the villain in your story when all I wanted was... He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering across his features before the mask slammed back into place. What? Penelope pressed. What did you want? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it all evening. I wanted someone who would look at me and see Harrison, not just Blackwood Industries and a net worth statement. The honesty in his voice hit Penelope like a physical blow. She set down her empty champagne flute with shaking hands, suddenly understanding that she wasn't the only one trapped in this impossible situation. Harrison, she said carefully, why did you agree to an arranged marriage? With your money, you could have any woman in Boston. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Could I? Every woman I've dated has been more interested in my portfolio than my personality. Every social interaction is calculated, every smile measured for what it might gain them. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to never know if someone likes you or just wants access to your world? Penelope felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall of resentment she'd built around this whole situation. So you thought an arranged marriage would be... what? More honest? I thought it would eliminate pretense. No games, no false declarations of love, no wondering about ulterior motives. Just two people entering into a mutually beneficial agreement with clear expectations. How terribly sad, Penelope said softly. Harrison's jaw tightened. It's practical. It's heartbreaking. They stared at each other across the table, champagne still glistening on Harrison's shirt, the ruins of Penelope's carefully planned evening scattered around them like the aftermath of a very polite war. We should probably leave, Harrison said finally, signaling for the check with a subtle gesture. I imagine we've provided enough entertainment for one evening. As they waited for the bill, Penelope found herself studying Harrison's profile, trying to reconcile the man sitting across from her with the monster of reputation. He looked tired, she realized. Successful, powerful, devastatingly handsome, but tired in a way that spoke to something deeper than late nights and business meetings. Harrison, she said as he signed the check with a platinum pen that probably cost more than her dress. Yes? For what it's worth, I don't think you're a monster. He looked up, and for just a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked again. Then what am I? Penelope considered the question seriously. I think you're a man who's been alone for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to be known. Harrison went very still. And what makes you think that? Because, she said, standing and smoothing her dress, I know exactly how that feels. Penelope woke up the next morning convinced she'd dreamed the entire evening. Surely she hadn't thrown champagne at Boston's most powerful man. Surely Harrison Blackwood hadn't looked at her with something that resembled genuine interest after she'd practically assaulted him with Dom Perignon. But then she saw her navy Valentino dress draped over her chair, still faintly smelling of expensive champagne and regret, and reality came flooding back. Oh God, she groaned into her pillow. I'm going to be murdered by a millionaire. A sharp knock on her bedroom door interrupted her spiral into panic. Penelope, darling? Vivian's voice carried that particular tone that meant either very good news or complete catastrophe. "We need to talk." Penelope pulled on her silk robe and opened the door to find her mother standing in the hallway with an expression that belonged in a Renaissance painting titled Maternal Disappointment. "How did it go?" Vivian asked, sweeping into the room like a dramatic storm cloud in Chanel. "Well," Penelope said carefully, "he didn't call off the wedding." "That's not exactly the glowing review I was hoping for." Vivian settled onto the window seat with the grace of someone who'd been practicing elegant sitting for 47 years. "What happened? And please tell me you didn't mention the cat rescue incident." "Mother, I threw champagne in his face." The silence that followed was so complete that Penelope wondered if she'd accidentally caused her mother to have a stroke. "You did what?" Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "I threw champagne at Harrison Blackwood. Dom Perignon. Probably a very expensive bottle." Vivian stared at her daughter as if she'd just announced her intention to join the circus. "Penelope Rose Sterling Hayes, please tell me you're joking." "I wish I were." "Oh my God." Vivian stood up and began pacing, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like a metronome of doom. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We're ruined. Completely ruined. He'll never go through with the marriage now. Your father will go to prison. We'll lose everything. I'll have to move in with your Aunt Gertrude in Connecticut, and she has 17 cats and serves dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon." "Mother, breathe! Don't tell me to breathe. I'm having a crisis." Vivian stopped pacing and whirled around to face her daughter. "Why would you throw champagne at him? What could have possibly possessed you to—" The doorbell rang. Both women froze like deer caught in headlights. "Oh God, it's him," Vivian whispered. "He's come to tell us the engagement is off, or to have you arrested for assault." "Do they arrest people for champagne assault? Is that a real crime?" "Mother, please." "Or maybe he's brought his lawyers. Rich people always bring lawyers when they want to destroy you." The doorbell rang again, followed by their housekeeper's voice calling up the stairs. "Mrs. Sterling Hayes? There's a delivery for Miss Penelope." "A delivery?" Vivian and Penelope said in unison. They crept down the grand staircase like spies in their own home, only to find Mrs. Henderson, their housekeeper of 20 years, standing in the foyer next to the most enormous bouquet of flowers Penelope had ever seen. And when she said enormous, she meant enormous. The arrangement was easily 4 feet tall and probably 3 feet wide, a masterpiece of white roses, peonies, and something that looked like it had been flown in from an exotic island, specifically for this purpose. "Good heavens," Vivian breathed. Mrs. Henderson, who had seen everything in her decades of service to Boston's elite, looked slightly stunned. "The delivery man said they're from a Mr. Blackwood, and there's a note." Penelope approached the floral mountain with the caution of someone defusing a bomb. Nestled among the white blooms was a small envelope with her name written in strong, masculine handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers and read, "Miss Sterling Hayes. Thank you for the most honest evening I've had in years. The champagne was excellent, though I prefer to drink it rather than wear it. Would you do me the honor of joining me for lunch today? I believe we have much to discuss, and I promise to bring my own towel. Harrison P.S. The flowers are white because they represent new beginnings. I thought we might need one." Penelope read the note 3 times before the words fully registered. "Well?" Vivian demanded. "What does it say? Are we ruined? Do I need to start packing?" Silently, Penelope handed her mother the note. Vivian's eyes widened as she read. "He's asking you to lunch? Apparently. After you threw champagne at him. That does seem to be the timeline, yes." Mother and daughter stared at each other in mutual bewilderment. "I don't understand men," Vivian said finally. 2 hours later, Penelope found herself sitting in the conservatory of Harrison's Beacon Hill mansion, surrounded by enough flowering plants to stock a botanical garden. She'd chosen a simple cream sundress and had spent 45 minutes doing her hair, though she told herself it was just because she wanted to look respectable, not because she was trying to impress him. Harrison appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of sandwiches and looking unfairly handsome in dark jeans and a white button-down shirt. The casual attire somehow made him seem more approachable, more human, and infinitely more dangerous to her peace of mind. "Thank you for coming," he said, setting the tray on a wrought iron table between two wicker chairs. "I wasn't sure you would. After throwing champagne at you, I figured I owed you at least an explanation." "Actually," Harrison said, settling into the chair across from her, "I was hoping for something else entirely." Penelope's heart did something acrobatic in her chest. "What?" "A do-over." She blinked. "A what?" "A do-over. A chance to start again without the pressure of arranged marriages and family debt and everything else." He leaned forward, and those storm-gray eyes were suddenly very intense. "I'd like to take you to dinner, Penelope. Not because of any arrangement between our families, not because of money or business or social expectations, just because I'd like to get to know you better. You want to date me? I want to court you," he corrected, and the old-fashioned word sounded impossibly romantic in his deep voice. "Properly. The way you deserve to be courted." Penelope felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. "But we're already engaged." "Are we?" Harrison smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Because I don't remember proposing." "Harrison, have lunch with me," he said softly. "Let me tell you about myself. Not the business mogul or the reputation, but me. And you can tell me about art history and traveling and why you rescue cats. We can pretend, just for a few hours, that we're two normal people who met under normal circumstances." Penelope looked at him sitting there in his sun-drenched conservatory, surrounded by flowers and possibility, and felt something dangerous unfurling in her chest. "What about the arrangement? The money? My family's debts?" "All still taken care of," Harrison assured her. "I'm not going anywhere, Penelope. But I'd rather you choose to marry me because you want to, not because you have to." And with those words, Harrison Blackwood did something infinitely more dangerous than any business deal or arranged marriage. He gave her hope. 3 weeks later, Penelope Sterling Hayes was in serious trouble. Not the kind of trouble that involved champagne throwing or family debt or arranged marriages, though technically she was still engaged to be married in 10 days. No, this was a much more dangerous kind of trouble. She was falling in love with Harrison Blackwood. It had started innocently enough. Their do-over lunch had turned into dinner the next night. Dinner had led to a morning coffee. Coffee had evolved into long walks through the public garden, afternoon visits to the Museum of Fine Arts, and evenings spent talking until the sun came up. And somewhere between Harrison explaining why he'd dropped out of Harvard Business School, I wanted to build something, not just inherit it, and Penelope describing her thesis on Renaissance art restoration, you can save something beautiful even if it's been damaged, she'd realized she was in deep, dangerous water. "You're glowing," announced Sophia Chen, Penelope's best friend since college, as they sat in their favorite cafe on Newberry Street. "It's disgusting. Stop it immediately." "I'm not glowing," Penelope protested, stirring her latte with unnecessary vigor. "Please, you look like someone plugged you into the electrical grid, which means one of two things. Either you've discovered some miraculous new skincare routine, or you're falling for your fake fiancé." Penelope nearly choked on her coffee. "It's not fake. Well, it is fake, but it's also real. But not in the way it started out being real." "Oh, honey," Sophia said with the wisdom of someone who'd watched too many romantic comedies. "You've got it bad." "I don't have anything," Penelope said firmly. "We're just getting to know each other, like reasonable adults preparing for a business arrangement." "Uh-huh. And that's why you've mentioned his name 47 times in the last hour?" "I have not mentioned his name 47 times. Harrison thinks this. Harrison said that. Harrison took me to see the most amazing private art collection." Sophia ticked off on her fingers. "Honey, if I had $1 for every time you've said Harrison today, I could buy my own art collection." Penelope slumped in her chair. "Oh God, I really am in trouble, aren't I?" The worst kind, Sophia confirmed cheerfully. You're in the kind of trouble that ends with white dresses and I do and actually meaning it. Before Penelope could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. From Harrison, of course. Are you free this afternoon? I have something to show you. Despite herself, Penelope felt her heart do that ridiculous fluttering thing it had been doing for weeks whenever Harrison contacted her. See? Sophia pointed at Penelope's face. Glowing. You're practically radioactive. 2 hours later, Penelope found herself standing in front of a beautiful brownstone in the back bay, completely confused. Harrison, she said, looking up at the elegant building with its flower boxes and wrought iron details. This is lovely, but why are we here? Harrison stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking uncharacteristically nervous. I bought it. You bought a house? I bought you a house. Penelope's brain performed several complicated gymnastics routines before settling on complete bewilderment. You bought me a what now? Let me show you, Harrison said, producing a set of keys and leading her up the front steps. The interior was breathtaking, soaring ceilings, original hardwood floors, and huge windows that flooded the space with afternoon light. But what made Penelope's breath catch wasn't the beautiful architecture. It was what Harrison had done with it. The main floor had been converted into a perfect art gallery space. Professional lighting, climate control, pristine white walls designed to showcase artwork. Upstairs, she discovered a fully equipped conservation lab, complete with microscopes, specialized tools, and everything needed for art restoration work. Harrison, she whispered, running her fingers along a work table that probably cost more than most people's cars. What is this? It's yours, he said simply. Your gallery, your restoration studio, your space to do whatever you want with art. Penelope turned to stare at him. I can't accept this. Why not? Because it's insane. You can't just buy someone a house. I bought my sister a horse when she turned 16, Harrison said with a slight smile. This seemed more practical. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Penelope gestured around the perfect studio. This is too much. This is life-changing money. Good, Harrison said, stepping closer. I want to change your life. The intensity in his voice made something warm unfurl in Penelope's chest. Harrison. I know this arrangement started as a business deal, he said, his storm-gray eyes serious. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about business for me. I don't want to marry you because of your family's debts, Penelope. I want to marry you because you throw champagne when you're angry and rescue stray cats and light up when you talk about art. I want to marry you because you see me, really see me, not just the money or the reputation. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. You can't just buy my feelings with a gallery. I'm not trying to buy your feelings, Harrison said softly. I'm trying to show you that I understand your dreams. That I want to help you achieve them, not because I have to, but because making you happy makes me happy. That's... Penelope struggled for words. That's terrifyingly romantic. Harrison laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. They stood there in the beautiful gallery space, afternoon light streaming through the windows, surrounded by possibility and the weight of everything they weren't quite saying. Penelope, Harrison said finally, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. If there were no family debts, no arranged marriage, no external pressure at all, would you want to be with me? The question hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Penelope looked at Harrison, really looked at him, at the man who'd listened to her talk about art for hours without getting bored, who'd remembered that she liked jasmine tea and brought her a box from a specialty shop in Chinatown, who'd spent a fortune creating a space where her dreams could come true, not to buy her affection, but to show her he understood what mattered to her. Yes, she whispered. Harrison's face transformed with relief and something that looked like joy. Really, but Harrison, this is all happening so fast. 3 weeks ago, I didn't even know you existed. Now you're talking about marriage and buying me galleries, and I need time to process all of this." "How much time?" he asked, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made her heart ache. "I don't know. Maybe we could postpone the wedding? Give ourselves a chance to figure out if this is real or just some kind of intense Stockholm syndrome brought on by expensive champagne and flower deliveries." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and Penelope held her breath, terrified she'd just ruined everything. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay. Okay. We'll postpone the wedding. We'll take all the time you need." He paused, then added with a smile that made her knees weak, "But I'm keeping the gallery ready for you, just in case." And as Penelope stood there in her perfect art studio, looking at the man who was willing to wait for her to choose him freely, she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with a warm, golden certainty. She was already choosing him. She just needed a little more time to be brave enough to say it out loud. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, courtesy of Boston's most notorious society blogger, Bitsy Worthington, whose poison pen had been ruining reputations since the Clinton administration. Wedding of the century postponed. Sources close to the Sterling Hayes family confirm that Penelope's marriage to mogul Harrison Blackwood has been mysteriously delayed. Could it be cold feet, financial irregularities, or perhaps our favorite heiress has discovered something unsavory about her billionaire beau? This reporter has her theories. Penelope read the blog post 3 times before throwing her phone across her bedroom, where it landed with a satisfying thud against a pile of wedding planning books she'd been avoiding. "Penelope!" Vivienne's voice carried up the stairs with the force of a hurricane. "Get down here this instant!" Penelope pulled a pillow over her head and briefly considered emigrating to a small island nation where society bloggers and wedding planners couldn't find her. Penelope Rose Sterling Hayes. With a sigh that came from the depths of her soul, Penelope dragged herself downstairs to face the maternal firing squad. She found Vivienne in the morning room, clutching her iPad like it personally offended her, surrounded by what appeared to be every newspaper and magazine in the greater Boston area. Her father, Richard, sat in his usual chair looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else on earth, a sentiment Penelope completely understood. "Explain," Vivienne demanded without preamble, "why Bitsy Worthington knows about the postponement before I do. Good morning to you too, Mother." "Don't get smart with me, young lady. Do you have any idea what this means? Any idea at all? That Bitsy Worthington needs a hobby? It means," Vivienne continued as if Penelope hadn't spoken, "that people are talking, gossiping, speculating about our family's private business. The phone has been ringing all morning with reporters asking for statements." Richard finally looked up from his newspaper. "Perhaps we should have discussed this postponement as a family before." "There was nothing to discuss," Penelope interrupted. "Harrison and I decided we needed more time. End of story." "More time for what?" Vivienne demanded. "To fall in love? Darling, love is a luxury. You have a perfectly good man who's willing to marry you and solve all our problems. What more could you possibly need?" Before Penelope could answer, their housekeeper appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. "Mrs. Sterling Hayes, Mr. Blackwood is here to see Miss Penelope." All 3 family members turned toward the door as Harrison entered, looking devastatingly handsome despite the obvious tension around his eyes. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But Penelope had learned to read the subtle signs of his moods. The slight tightness around his mouth meant he was angry. The way he held his shoulders meant he was trying not to show it. "Harrison," Vivienne said, immediately switching to her most charming social mode. "How lovely to see you. I was just telling Penelope—" "Mrs. Sterling Hayes," Harrison interrupted politely but firmly. "I was hoping to speak with Penelope privately." "Of course," Richard said, standing quickly and clearly desperate to escape. "Vivienne, perhaps we should—" "Actually," Vivienne said, settling more firmly into her chair, "I think we should all discuss this situation together, as a family." Penelope watched Harrison's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. What situation would that be? The postponement, Vivian said with a bright smile that fooled absolutely no one. And the unfortunate publicity it's generated. I see. Harrison's voice was perfectly controlled, but Penelope could hear the steel underneath. And what exactly would you like to discuss about it? Well, Vivian began, warming to her theme. Perhaps we could announce a new date. Something soon. I'm sure we could have everything ready within the month if we… No. The single word cut through Vivian's chatter like a blade. I'm sorry, she said, blinking in confusion. I said no. Harrison's storm-gray eyes were suddenly very cold. There will be no announcement of a new date until Penelope and I decide we're ready. And we're not ready. Penelope felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his use of we. But the gossip, Vivian protested. Is irrelevant, Harrison finished. Penelope's comfort and happiness are more important than managing other people's opinions. That's very romantic, Vivian said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. But surely you understand the practical implications. Mother. Penelope's voice was quiet, but firm. Stop. You're trying to control a situation that isn't yours to control. Penelope stood up, surprising herself with her own decisiveness. Harrison and I will get married when and if we decide to get married. Not because of gossip, not because of financial pressure, and not because you're embarrassed by postponing a wedding. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Furthermore, Penelope continued, momentum building, if you're so concerned about what people think, perhaps you should consider that forcing your daughter into marriage for money reflects rather poorly on your parenting. The silence that followed was so complete that Penelope could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Penelope, Richard said finally, his voice gentle, your mother is just worried. About money, Penelope finished. Not about my happiness. Not about whether I'm making the right choice. Just money. That's not fair, Vivian said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Isn't it? Penelope looked between her parents. When was the last time either of you asked if I was happy? When was the last time you cared about what I wanted instead of what I could provide for this family? Harrison, who had been watching this family drama unfold with the attention of a chess master studying a complex game, suddenly stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling Hayes, he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had built empires. I think it's time you understood something. Your daughter is not for sale. Vivian gasped. I never suggested, didn't you? Harrison's gaze was laser-focused. You arranged a marriage between strangers based solely on financial benefit. You pressured Penelope into agreeing by threatening her father's freedom and her family's security. And now you're pressuring her to speed up a wedding because you're worried about appearances. We were trying to save our family, Richard said quietly. By sacrificing hers, Harrison replied. But here's what you seem to have missed. I don't want a wife who's been coerced into marrying me. I want Penelope to choose me freely, or not at all. He turned to look at Penelope, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Which brings me to why I'm here, he said. Penelope, I've been thinking about what you said, about needing time, about this all happening too fast. Penelope's heart started hammering against her ribs. Okay, I think you're right. I think we both got caught up in the arrangement, in the expectation, in the idea of what this could be. But I don't want to marry an idea, Penelope. I want to marry you. Harrison, so I'm withdrawing from the arrangement, he said simply. The words hit the room like a bomb. What? Vivian shrieked. I'm withdrawing, Harrison repeated calmly. I'll still honor my commitment to resolve your family's financial difficulties. That was never conditional on marriage. But I'm releasing Penelope from any obligation to marry me. Penelope felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. You're… What? Harrison stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. I'm setting you free, Penelope, completely free. No arrangements, no obligations, no family pressure. You can choose whatever life you want. But, Penelope struggled to find words. But what about us? Harrison smiled, and it was soft and genuine and utterly devastating. Well, I was hoping that once you're free to choose anything, you might choose me anyway. But this time, it would be because you want to, not because you have to. And with that, Harrison Blackwood did something that no romance novel hero had ever done in the history of literature. He walked away from the sure thing and bet everything on love. For exactly 37 seconds after Harrison walked out, Penelope stood frozen in her parents' morning room, staring at the door through which the love of her life had just disappeared. Then reality hit her like a freight train. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, what have I done?" "What you've done," Vivian said, her voice rising to a pitch that could shatter crystal, "is let the best thing that ever happened to this family walk out that door." But Penelope wasn't listening. She was remembering Harrison's face when he'd said he was setting her free, the quiet dignity in his voice, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth loving even if she never loved him back. And she did love him back. God help her. She was completely, hopelessly, devastatingly in love with Harrison Blackwood. "I have to go after him," she said, more to herself than to her parents. "Finally!" Vivian exclaimed. "Some sense. Though perhaps you should change first. That dress is lovely, but for groveling, I'd recommend something more." "I'm not groveling," Penelope said, suddenly calm with the crystalline clarity that comes with knowing exactly what you need to do. "I'm going to tell him I love him." Richard looked up from his newspaper, startled. "You love him?" "I'm terribly in love with him," Penelope confirmed. "Embarrassingly so. The kind of love that makes you want to write terrible poetry and name cats after him." "Oh, darling," Vivian breathed, her annoyance melting into something that looked almost like maternal pride. "How wonderfully romantic." "It is, isn't it?" Penelope smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Now, how do I find him?" 20 minutes later, Penelope was standing in the marble lobby of Blackwood Industries' gleaming downtown tower, wearing her favorite yellow sundress and holding her breath while the receptionist, a severe-looking woman who could have doubled as a Secret Service agent, made a phone call. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling Hayes," the receptionist said, with the kind of professional politeness that managed to sound both helpful and dismissive. "But Mr. Blackwood is not available. Could you tell him it's urgent? I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood left explicit instructions that he was not to be disturbed today." Penelope felt panic flutter in her chest. "Do you know where he went?" The receptionist's expression softened slightly, as if she recognized the look of a woman on the verge of a romantic emergency. "I'm not supposed to give out that information, but—" She glanced around, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "He mentioned something about needing to clear his head. Mr. Blackwood usually goes to his boat when he needs to think." "His boat?" "The marina. Boston Harbor. It's called Second Chances." Penelope could have kissed her. The taxi ride to the marina felt like the longest journey of her life, even though it probably took less than 15 minutes. Penelope spent the entire time rehearsing what she was going to say, discarding one speech after another. "Harrison, I love you." Too simple. "Harrison, I made a terrible mistake, too focused on her errors." "Harrison, please marry me." Too forward. "Harrison, I choose you." Perfect. But what if he'd already changed his mind? By the time the taxi pulled up to the marina, Penelope had worked herself into a state of nervous energy that could have powered a small city. She found Second Chances at the end of the third dock, a sleek sailing yacht that looked like it belonged in a luxury magazine spread. And there, sitting on the deck with his back to the marina, was Harrison. He'd changed out of his business suit and was wearing jeans and a navy sweater that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. His dark hair was mussed by the ocean breeze, and he was staring out at the harbor with the kind of stillness that suggested deep thought. Penelope's heart clenched at the sight of him. "Harrison," she called out as she walked down the dock, her heels clicking against the wooden planks. He turned, and the surprise on his face quickly gave way to something more cautious. "Penelope, what are you doing here?" "I came to tell you something," she said, stopping at the edge of the boat. "Something important." Harrison stood, but didn't move to help her aboard. "If it's about the arrangement, you don't need to." "It's not about the arrangement," Penelope interrupted. "It's about me being an idiot." That got his attention. "I'm listening." "Harrison, for the past 6 weeks I've been so focused on not being forced into marriage that I completely missed the fact that I was falling in love with you." Something shifted in Harrison's expression, but he didn't speak. "I've been so worried about choosing you for the wrong reasons that I almost lost you for the right ones," Penelope continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "But when you walked away today, when you set me free, I realized something." "What's that?" "I realized that I don't want to be free from you, Harrison. I want to be free with you." Harrison was very still. "Penelope, I love you," she said, the words coming out stronger and clearer than she'd expected. "Not because you bought me a gallery, or because you can solve my family's problems, or because you look really good in expensive suits, though you do. I love you because you listen when I talk about art like it matters. Because you rescued me from that awful dinner party last week by pretending you had a business emergency. Because you've never once made me feel like I should be anything other than exactly who I am." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of waves lapping against the boat's hull. "I love you because you threw champagne at me," Harrison said finally, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's a weird reason to love someone." "It was the moment I knew you were real," Harrison said, stepping closer to the edge of the boat. "Everyone else in my life has spent years telling me what they think I want to hear, but you threw Dom Perignon at my face and told me exactly what you thought of me. And what did I think of you? That I was an arrogant, cruel man who thought he could buy whatever he wanted." Harrison's smile widened. "You weren't entirely wrong. And now? Now I think you're an arrogant, beautiful man who gave up everything he thought he wanted because he realized what he actually needed." Harrison laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "And what do I actually need?" "Me," Penelope said with a confidence that surprised her. "You need me, Harrison Blackwood, just like I need you." "Is that a proposal, Miss Sterling Hayes?" "That depends," Penelope said, grinning. "Is that a yes, Mr. Blackwood?" Instead of answering, Harrison reached down and lifted her onto the boat in one smooth movement, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy and completely, perfectly happy. When he finally set her down, his hands remained on her waist, and his gray eyes were warm with something that looked like wonder. "Penelope Sterling Hayes," he said softly, "will you marry me? Not because of any arrangement or obligation or family pressure, but because you love me and I love you, and we want to build a life together." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." And when Harrison kissed her there on the deck of Second Chances, with Boston Harbor sparkling around them and the afternoon sun painting everything golden, Penelope thought that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that started with disasters and ended with choices. After all, she'd thrown champagne at him on their first date. It only seemed fitting that their first kiss would taste like salt air and second chances. 6 months later, on a perfect September afternoon, Penelope Sterling Hayes became Mrs. Harrison Blackwood in the most unconventional wedding Boston society had ever witnessed. Instead of the stuffy country club ceremony originally planned, they were married in the sculpture garden of the Museum of Fine Arts, surrounded by Renaissance masterpieces and exactly 43 guests, mostly friends, a few family members, and every single cat from the shelter where Penelope volunteered. Well, not literally, but the wedding favors were donations to the animal rescue in lieu of sugared almonds, which Penelope thought was much more practical. "You look beautiful," Harrison murmured as they stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face. Penelope smiled, feeling radiant in a simple ivory dress she'd chosen herself. No input from Vivian required. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Blackwood." The ceremony was officiated by Harrison's college roommate, now a judge, who had insisted on including the story of how they met in his remarks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Morrison announced with barely contained glee, "we are here today to celebrate the marriage of Harrison and Penelope, whose love story began with what I'm told was the most spectacular champagne-throwing incident in Ritz-Carlton history." The small crowd laughed, and Penelope caught Harrison's eye. He winked. "Harrison," Judge Morrison continued, "do you take Penelope to be your wife, promising to love her whether she's throwing champagne or drinking it?" "I do," Harrison said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. "And Penelope, do you take Harrison to be your husband, promising to love him even when he buys you ridiculously expensive gifts that make you cry happy tears?" "I do," Penelope said, thinking of the art studio that had become her sanctuary, her workplace, and the foundation of the gallery she was opening next month. "Then by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and with the blessing of everyone who's been waiting months for you two to stop being ridiculous and just get married already, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Harrison, you may kiss your bride. Just maybe duck if she's holding any beverages." The kiss was perfect, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, the small crowd erupted in cheers, and Sophia Chen shouted, "Finally!" so loudly that several nearby museum visitors came to investigate. The reception was held in Penelope's gallery, their gallery now, with catering by a small local restaurant, and music provided by a string quartet that Harrison had somehow convinced to learn "The Way You Look Tonight," specifically for their first dance. As they swayed together in the space where she'd first realized she was falling in love with him, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "Any regrets?" Harrison asked softly, his arms tight around her waist. "Only one," Penelope said. Harrison pulled back to look at her, concern flickering across his features. "What's that?" "I wish I'd thrown the champagne sooner," she said with a grin. "We could have been doing this months ago." Harrison threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing through the gallery and mixing with the music and the happy chatter of their friends. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood," he said when he could speak again. "I love you too, Mr. Blackwood. Champagne stains and all." Epilogue. 2 years later. "Harrison James Blackwood, if you don't stop rearranging the paintings, I'm going to throw something at you, and this time it won't be champagne." Penelope's voice carried across the main gallery space of Sterling Blackwood Fine Arts, the most successful new gallery in Boston's art district. She emerged from the back office, her curly red hair escaping from a messy bun and a smudge of paint on her cheek from the restoration work she'd been doing all morning. Harrison looked up from where he'd been subtly adjusting the lighting on a Renaissance landscape, completely unrepentant. "But the shadows were all wrong. This piece deserves better." "It's been hanging there for 3 weeks. The shadows were fine." "They're perfect now," Harrison said with the satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a complex equation. Penelope shook her head, but she was smiling. In 2 years of marriage, she'd learned that Harrison had very strong opinions about proper art presentation, despite having no formal training whatsoever. He'd also appointed himself as the gallery's unofficial technical consultant, acoustic advisor, and climate control specialist. "You're impossible," she said, walking over to straighten his tie, which had somehow become crooked during his lighting adjustment project. "You married me anyway," Harrison pointed out, catching her hands and pulling her closer. "Temporary insanity," Penelope said solemnly. "I'm much better now." "Liar. You love being married to me." "I love being married to you," she agreed, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. "Even when you meddle with my gallery." "Our gallery," Harrison corrected, "and I prefer to call it quality enhancement." Before Penelope could respond, the gallery's front door chimed, and Sophia Chen burst in looking like she'd just won the lottery. "Emergency," she announced dramatically. "Penelope, I need your expert opinion immediately." "What's wrong?" Penelope asked, instantly concerned. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. Tom proposed. Sophia thrust out her left hand, where a beautiful vintage ring sparkled on her finger. "Oh my God!" Penelope squealed, grabbing Sophia's hand to examine the ring. "When? How? Tell me everything." "Last night at that little Italian place we love. He hid the ring in my tiramisu, which was both romantic and potentially dangerous. I could have choked." Harrison cleared his throat. "Congratulations, Sophia. Tom's a lucky man." "Thank you, Harrison. And since you two are basically the poster couple for arranged marriages that turn into fairy tale romances, I was hoping you'd help me plan the perfect wedding." Penelope and Harrison exchanged a look. "Well," Penelope said carefully, "our wedding planning advice might be a bit unconventional." "Perfect," Sophia said. "Conventional is boring. I want something memorable." "Rule number 1, Harrison said with complete seriousness. Always keep beverages away from the bride during stressful moments. "Rule number 2, Penelope added, grinning. Sometimes the best love stories start with disasters. "And rule number 3, they said in unison. When you know, you know." Sophia looked back and forth between them, noting the way Harrison's hand had automatically found Penelope's, the way they seemed to share some private joke in their exchanged glances, the way they both looked completely, perfectly happy. "You know what?" Sophia said. "I think I'm going to need to hear this whole story again. From the beginning, with all the details." Penelope laughed. "That could take a while." "I've got time," Sophia said, settling into one of the gallery's elegant chairs. "Besides, I love stories with happy endings." Harrison pulled Penelope close to his side, and she leaned into him naturally, fitting against him like she'd been made for exactly that spot. "Once upon a time," Penelope began, her eyes twinkling, "there was a girl who threw champagne at a very wealthy, very surprised man, and lived happily ever after." Harrison finished softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Outside the gallery windows, Boston bustled with its usual energy, but inside, surrounded by beautiful art and filled with love and laughter, time seemed to slow down just enough for perfect moments to last a little longer. After all, some stories are worth savoring, especially the ones that start with champagne and end with forever. The end.